As we celebrate May Day and the bicentenary of the birth of Karl Marx, the reemergence of class conflict throughout the world, and in particular in the United States, confirms that the class struggle is indeed the driving force of historical development. The history of all hitherto existing society, Marx and Engels wrote in the Communist Manifesto in 1847, is the history of class struggles. The distinct feature of capitalism, they wrote, is that it simplified the class antagonisms. Society as a whole is more and more splitting up into two great hostile camps, into two great classes directly facing each other, bourgeoisie and proletariat. 10 years after the global financial crash in the summer of 2008, the class struggle is resurging around the world. Since the beginning of the year, there have been upheavals in Tunisia, Iran, and Greece, a wave of industrial strikes in Germany, working class opposition against Macron, the president of the rich, in France, and class battles in India, Sri Lanka, and South Korea. In the United States, statewide strikes by teachers in West Virginia, Oklahoma, and Arizona have been part of a worldwide revolt by educators spanning Europe, Latin America, Asia, and Africa. Over the last decade, the resistance of workers to capitalist exploitation was suppressed by the pro-capitalist unions and social democratic, Stalinist, and pseudo-left parties. Between 2008 and 2017, there were only 129 work stoppages involving 1,000 or more workers in the United States, the lowest 10-year period since the Bureau of Labor Statistics began recording strikes in 1947. By contrast, between 1968 and 1977, there were 3,238 major strikes, or 25 times more than the last decade. The suppression of the class struggle by the unions allowed the ruling class to carry out a historic redistribution of wealth from the bottom to the top. Under Obama, the financial speculators who crashed the economy were bailed out, and the stock markets reinflated through a regime of virtually free credit, which depended on preventing any rise in, quote, inflation, the code word for increasing wages. The ruling class's decade-long program of social counter-revolution escalated with the gutting of health care and pensions, resulting in a decline in life expectancy for older workers, while the young generation was condemned to low-wage, temporary jobs and crushing college debts. Despite the long efforts to deny the existence of the class struggle in the land of so-called unlimited opportunity, the division of American society into two hostile camps has never been clearer. Just 3 billionaires, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, and Warren Buffett, have the same amount of wealth as the bottom 160 million people in America. The top 1% of American households own more wealth than the bottom 90% combined. After Trump's tax cut, corporations are sitting on a cash hoard of more than $2 trillion, and companies like Apple are spending record amounts on dividends and stock buybacks to further enrich investors and top executives. The contending factions of the American political establishment are engaged in bitter infighting over geopolitical and military policy, with the corporate media and the Democrats speaking for the military intelligence agencies and hurling accusations of sexual misconduct and Russian collusion at Trump to shift him even further to the right, including into a direct military confrontation with Russia. In an effort to direct internal social tensions outward, the media and the Democrats are blaming the Russians for sowing divisions in America, as if without Putin and the Russians, America would be a thoroughly contented society. The American working class, however, is consumed with entirely different concerns over plummeting wages, austerity, social inequality, mass deportations, and the danger of war and dictatorship. Over the last 2 months, statewide strikes by teachers have spread across West Virginia, Oklahoma, and Arizona, and strikes and protests have hit or are continuing to spread in Colorado, New Jersey, Florida, the Carolinas, and the U.S. territory of Puerto Rico. As one teacher in Oklahoma protesting in front of the state capitol for increased school funding for her children told the WSWS, "I didn't see Putin or any other Russians inside the state capitol." It is significant that teachers have been in the forefront of this resurgence of the class struggle. They deeply identify with the egalitarian principles of public education, which are incompatible with the staggering levels of inequality, and are intimately aware of the impact of bipartisan funding cuts and the growth of poverty and other social ills like the opioid epidemic on their school children. Various fake left apologists of the unions have attempted to claim that the teacher strikes have given a new breath of fresh air to the unions. But the strikes were not initiated by the unions, which opposed them and did everything to shut them down once they erupted. Instead, the struggles were initiated by rank-and-file teachers using social media who rebelled against the unions and their collusion with the austerity measures imposed by Democrats and Republicans alike. This prompted a worried comment from the New York Times about teachers using social media to, quote, organize and act outside the usual parameters of traditional unionism. Now, no position of the International Committee of the Fourth International has been more bitterly attacked by the pseudo-left than its exposure of the right-wing role and anti-working class character of the unions. Yet our analysis of the transformation of the unions into direct agencies of the corporations and the capitalist state is the most powerful confirmation of the Marxist method. The ICFI was alone in uncovering the historical significance of the global integration of capitalist production in the late 80s and 90s. Globalization, we explained, had fatally undermined the Stalinist program of socialism in one country in the USSR, and the nationalist programs that formed the foundation of all the unions and labor parties. The next period of working class radicalization, the ICFI insisted, would take the form of a rebellion against these nationalist and pro-capitalist organizations. Workers would be more and more compelled to coordinate their struggles against the global corporations on the basis of an international and socialist perspective, which the ICFI alone embodies. When addressing the representatives of the ruling elite, the union officials openly boast that their chief function is to prevent strikes and enforce the dictates of the employers in the state. This was spelled out earlier this year in the opening argument by union lawyers before the Supreme Court in the case of Janus versus AFSCME. The sanctioning of the unions by the state and the guarantee of their financial security, the union attorney argued, was a trade-off for, quote, no strikes. If the court ruled against the unions collecting agency fees from public employees who are not members, the lawyer warned, quote, you can raise an untold specter of labor unrest throughout the country. The teachers' revolt is a sign of what is to come. In every section of the working class, there is a mood of rebellion. The call by the ICFI for workers to form new organizations of struggle, independent of the corporatist unions and controlled by the rank and file, has won powerful support. In the United States, an incipient rebellion is brewing against the United Auto Workers Union, whose corrupt relations with the auto companies and role as a cheap labor contractor was highlighted in the tragic and still unexplained death 6 months ago of Jacoby Hennings, the 21-year-old temporary part-time worker at a Detroit area Ford plant. But every class struggle is a political struggle. Marx and Engels insisted in the Communist Manifesto. That is, every struggle of the working class for its rights, whether for decent wages, public education, against war and state repression, poses the necessity of the working class being organized as an independent political force and taking political power in its own hands so it can reorganize economic and political life to meet society's needs. Spontaneous struggles, no matter how militant, cannot solve the crisis of revolutionary leadership or automatically clarify the political tasks of the working class. A party based on the most advanced revolutionary theory and gathering within its ranks the most politically advanced sections of workers and youth must bring socialist consciousness into the struggles of the working class. Our politics is not conjunctural, but of a principled character, Leon Trotsky wrote in 1940. For us, the primary concern of every political campaign is that it guide workers from the particular question to the general, that it teach them the nature of modern society and the character of its fundamental forces. Now, anti-Marxists around the world have long claimed that the American working class was too backward for socialism. The agency for social change, these demoralized skeptics insisted, are the privileged sections of minorities and women who, far from seeking the overthrow of capitalism, only want to join the ranks of the oppressors. In contrast, the International Committee of the Fourth International, the World Trotskyist Movement, has always insisted that the American working class, driven into struggle by the historic breakdown of American and world capitalism, would turn to Marxism to understand its social position and historic tasks and make a monumental contribution to the world socialist revolution. The development of the class struggle in the United States is transforming world politics. The awakening of this sleeping giant, the American proletariat, will inspire struggles all over the world, undermining the most reactionary force on the planet, American imperialism, and workers in the United States will join their class brothers and sisters internationally in the greatest emancipatory struggle the world has ever known. Following the clarion call of the Communist Manifesto, workers of the world unite. The proletariat has nothing to lose but its chains. They have the world to win.